Welcome to True Crime Documentary. In this episode, we venture into the dark corners of human relationships where the lines between love and obsession are blurred and the consequences are deadly. Get ready to uncover the shocking tale of a secret love affair that ended in a gruesome murder. The tragic tale of Jet Robertson. Jet Robertson was just 18 years old when his life was brutally cut short. A senior at Bryden High School in Bridgeton, Missouri, a quiet suburb of St. Louis, Jet was known for his passion for bicycles. He spent most of his free time working on them in the garage or riding around town. Jet was the kind of kid who was always willing to lend a helping hand, whether it was fixing a neighbor's flat tire or volunteering at local events like the Bridger Fall Festival. A life of promise and tragedy. Jet's life had taken a difficult turn earlier that year when his father died suddenly of a heart attack. The loss hit him hard, leaving a void that no one could quite fill. His step-grandmother, Nancy McCarr, became his main source of comfort during this period. Nancy had been a constant presence in Jet's life, partially raising him after his mother, Brielle Cana, left the family when he was just 14 years old. A web of deceit and obsession. With his mother gone and his father now deceased, Jet turned to Nancy for emotional support. She was always there with a listening ear and a warm hug, making Jet feel like he wasn't alone. But beneath the surface, a dark secret was brewing. A secret that would soon lead to his tragic and untimely death. A future cut short. Jet had dreams of leaving Bridger after graduation. He often talked about moving to the relatively glamorous Kansas City, where he hoped to find work as a bicycle mechanic and eventually open his own shop. His friends and teachers described him as hardworking and full of potential. He was even saving up for a trip to Chicago, something he wanted to do since he was a child. In the days before his death, Jet was focused on his future, excited about the prospect of leaving his small-town life behind. He was also preparing for Halloween, planning to dress up as Nancy from his favorite TV show, Stranger Things. But little did anyone know, a sinister force was lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike, a force that would shatter the tranquility of Bridgeton and leave a community in shock. Tune in to find out what happened to Jet Robertson and how a secret love affair between a grandmother and her step-grandson ended in a gruesome murder. A fateful morning. On the crisp fall morning of October 28, 2020, Bridgeton, Missouri was waking up to a day filled with the promise of pumpkin-spiced everything and the contentious 2020 election looming on the horizon. The streets were lined with political signs, and the air was alive with the buzz of anticipation. At around 8 o'clock in the morning, Kevin Robertson, Jet's stepfather, was getting ready to head out to his construction job. But as he went to check on Jet, he noticed that his usual morning routine seemed off. Jet hadn't come inside for breakfast, which was unusual since he was always up early, often tinkering in the garage before school. Kevin's curiosity turned to concern as he approached the garage door, which was slightly ajar. As Kevin entered the garage, he was met with a sight that would haunt him forever. Jet's lifeless body lay crumpled on the cold concrete floor, his head bloodied and battered. Beside him, the wrench that had once been a trusted tool in Jet's hands now lay stained with blood. Kevin's heart raced as he stood frozen, trying to process the scene in front of him. The shock quickly turned to panic as he rushed inside the house, grabbed his phone and dialed 911 with trembling hands. Kevin's voice was frantic as he told the operator about the terrible scene in the garage. His reaction was one of sheer terror. He had never expected to find his stepson like this. He paced back and forth in the driveway, looking up and down the street as if hoping to wake up from a bad dream. A community in shock. Within minutes, the Bridgeton Police Department arrived at the scene, securing the area and taking control of the garage and driveway. As neighbors began to gather, curious and concerned, the news of Jet's death spread quickly through the tight-knit community. Many residents were glued to their TVs watching politically charged coverage of the upcoming election when they got word of the tragic event unfolding just down the street. A nightmare unfolds. As paramedics arrived and confirmed Jet's death, Kevin was left in a state of disbelief. sitting on the curb with his head in his hands. He kept repeating, "Why would someone do this?" as officers tried to calm him down. The small suburban town of Bridgeton, known for sharing its name with the popular Netflix series, was suddenly thrust into a nightmare that would soon reveal more darkness than anyone could have imagined. The investigation begins. The Bridgeton Police Department responded quickly to the call, arriving at the Robertson home around 8:15 a.m. on October 28, 2020. Officer James Delgado, a 12-year veteran of the force, led the team. Known for his calm demeanor and sharp investigative skills, Delgado had seen his share of crime scenes, but nothing quite like this in the peaceful town of Bridgeton. A crime scene like no other. The garage where Jet's body was found was a small, cluttered space filled with the typical tools and gadgets of an 18-year-old who loved working on bicycles. The scene was eerily quiet, except for the occasional hum of a distant lawnmower or the chirping of birds. The concrete floor, usually dusty and scattered with bike parts, was now marred by a pool of dark, dried blood. The wrench, a heavy tool from Jet's own toolbox, lay beside him, its weight and size making it clear that it was the weapon used to bludgeon him to death. As Officer Delgado and his team began their investigation, they methodically documented the scene. Photographs were taken from every angle, capturing the blood splatter on the floor and walls, the position of Jet's body, and the wrench that delivered the fatal blows. The police carefully bagged the wrench as evidence, noting the blood stains and any potential fingerprints. They also collected samples from the blood pool and any other traces that might help identify the killer. The crime scene itself was a disturbing contrast, both clean and brutal. There was no sign of a struggle, suggesting that Jet had been caught off guard. The orderly state of the garage made the violent act even more shocking. The team's focus was on finding any clues that might point to the perpetrator, footprints, fibers, anything out of place. As the investigation continued, Delgado couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a random act of violence. The use of Jet's own tool as the murder weapon suggested a level of familiarity between the victim and the killer. The fact that there were no signs of forced entry or robbery led the police to believe that Jet's killer was someone he knew well, someone who had been in the garage with him before everything went wrong. By the end of the day, the crime scene was thoroughly canvassed, but the mystery was only beginning to unravel. The next step would be to question those closest to Jet. The police started to piece together the events that led to this gruesome murder. The first person they turned their attention to was Nancy Robertson McCarr, Jet's 74-year-old step-grandmother. Nancy was well known in Bridgeton as a retired schoolteacher who had spent decades educating the town's children with her silver hair and gentle smile. A suspect emerges. Nancy Robertson McCarr, Jet's 74-year-old step-grandmother, was the picture of a sweet, nurturing grandmother. However, the police couldn't ignore the whispers of her unusually close relationship with Jet, a relationship that had raised more than a few eyebrows among those who knew the family. Nancy had partially raised Jet after his father's sudden death, and the two had grown close in the years since. But close didn't begin to describe the reality of their bond. A dark secret revealed. The police soon learned that Nancy and Jet had been involved in a secret sexual relationship, a fact that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. This discovery cast Nancy in a whole new light and made her a prime suspect in the murder. When questioned by the police, Nancy was initially cooperative, appearing calm and sitting in her cozy living room surrounded by family photos and the faint scent of vanilla candles. She spoke fondly of Jet, describing him as a loving grandson who had been a source of comfort for her after her husband's death. A shift in demeanor. But as the questions grew more pointed, Nancy's demeanor began to shift. She became more defensive, her answers shorter and less detailed. When asked about her whereabouts on the morning of October 28th, Nancy claimed she had been at home preparing for a quiet day of reading and knitting. Despite her calm exterior, the police noticed that Nancy's hands were trembling slightly, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. They pressed her on the nature of her relationship with Jet, and while she denied anything inappropriate, the investigators weren't convinced. A possible motive. The wrench used to kill Jet was from his own toolbox, a detail that suggested the killer had access to his belongings, someone who knew him well enough to be in his private space without raising suspicion. Nancy's possible motive became clearer as the investigation progressed. It appeared that Jet had recently tried to end their sexual relationship, possibly out of guilt or fear of being discovered. This rejection may have driven Nancy to commit the unthinkable. The idea of losing Jet, her sexual object, combined with the possibility of their frankly disgusting secret being exposed, could have pushed her over the edge. As the police wrapped up their initial questioning, Nancy remained a person of interest. Her calm demeanor, while initially convincing, now seemed more like a mask hiding deep emotions. Emotions that might have led her to murder the very person she claimed to love. Kevin Robertson, Jet's 46-year-old stepfather, was the second suspect the police looked into. Kevin was a construction foreman known around Bridgeton for his tough, no-nonsense attitude. He had a gruff exterior, often seen wearing a worn-out Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots. Kevin was a man of few words, preferring to let his work do the talking. He had spent years in the construction business, building homes and managing crews. But his relationship with Jet had always been rocky. The tension between Kevin and Jet wasn't a secret. People in town had noticed the strained dynamic between them. A suspect emerges. Nancy Robertson McCarr, Jet's 74-year-old step-grandmother, was the picture of a sweet, nurturing grandmother. However, the police couldn't ignore the whispers of her unusually close relationship with Jet, a relationship that had raised more than a few eyebrows among those who knew the family. Nancy had partially raised Jet after his father's sudden death, and the two had grown close in the years since. But close didn't begin to describe the reality of their bond. A dark secret revealed. The police soon learned that Nancy and Jet had been involved in a secret sexual relationship, a fact that shocked even the most seasoned investigators. This discovery cast Nancy in a whole new light and made her a prime suspect in the murder. When questioned by the police, Nancy was initially cooperative, appearing calm and sitting in her cozy living room surrounded by family photos and the faint scent of vanilla candles. She spoke fondly of Jet, describing him as a loving grandson who had been a source of comfort for her after her husband's death. A shift in demeanor. But as the questions grew more pointed, Nancy's demeanor began to shift. She became more defensive, her answers shorter and less detailed. When asked about her whereabouts on the morning of October 28th, Nancy claimed she had been at home, preparing for a quiet day of reading and knitting. Despite her calm exterior, the police noticed that Nancy's hands were trembling slightly, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. They pressed her on the nature of her relationship with Jet, and while she denied anything inappropriate, the investigators weren't convinced. A possible motive. The wrench used to kill Jet was from his own toolbox, a detail that suggested the killer had access to his belongings, someone who knew him well enough to be in his private space without raising suspicion. Nancy's possible motive became clearer as the investigation progressed. It appeared that Jet had recently tried to end their sexual relationship, possibly out of guilt or fear of being discovered. This rejection may have driven Nancy to commit the unthinkable. The idea of losing Jet, her sexual object, combined with the possibility of their frankly disgusting secret being exposed, could have pushed her over the edge. In October 2020, Brielle, Jet's mother, had returned to Springfield, a nearby city, and was living in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Jet, still harboring resentment toward her for leaving him, was reluctant to let her back into his life. Their relationship remained strained, with only sporadic contact between them. However, Brielle was determined to make amends, and had been reaching out to him more frequently in the days leading up to his death. When the police brought Brielle in for questioning, she appeared nervous and anxious, dressed in a worn-out hoodie and jeans. She sat fidgeting in the interrogation room, her eyes darting around as she answered the detective's questions. Brielle denied any involvement in Jet's murder, insisting that she had only wanted to reconnect with her son and had no reason to harm him. She claimed that on the morning of October 28th, she was at a local AA meeting, trying to stay on the path of sobriety. The meeting, held at a church basement in Springfield some 200 miles away, was a regular part of her routine. Despite her alibi, detectives couldn't shake the feeling that Brielle was hiding something. Her past behavior and unstable mental state made her a person of interest in the case. The police pressed her on her whereabouts and her interactions with Jet in the days leading up to his death, but Brielle stuck to her story. She maintained that she had nothing to do with the murder and that she was only trying to be a better mother to her son. However, the police were skeptical. Brielle's history of erratic behavior, coupled with her recent attempts to reconnect with Jet, raised questions about her true motives. Was she trying to make up for lost time, or was there something more sinister at play? The detectives continued to dig into her past, searching for any clues that might link her to the crime. In the end, while Brielle's troubled history and strained relationship with Jet made her a prime suspect, there was no concrete evidence to tie her directly to the murder. The investigation into her involvement remained open, as the police looked for any overlooked details that could provide the answers they needed. On November 1, 2020, just days before Halloween and the heated presidential election, Bridgeton, Missouri, was experiencing a cold front with cloudy skies and a brisk wind that had residents bundling up in their favorite hoodies and jackets. It was on this chilly afternoon that a crucial piece of new evidence was discovered, bringing a significant twist to the investigation into Jet Robertson's murder. Detective Mark Travis, who had been leading the investigation, decided to revisit Jet's garage one more time, believing that something had been overlooked. As he searched through the cluttered space, he noticed an old wooden toolbox that had been pushed into a corner. Inside the toolbox, buried beneath a pile of rusty tools, Travis found a small leather-bound notebook. A hidden diary. The notebook, worn from years of use, was filled with Jet's neat handwriting detailing various thoughts and observations. As Detective Travis flipped through the pages, he stumbled upon something that immediately caught his attention. Tucked between notes about bike repairs and homework assignments was a series of entries that revealed Jet's growing suspicions about Nancy Robertson McCarr, his step-grandmother and secret lover. A web of deceit. The entries described how Jet had discovered troubling details about the mysterious death of Nancy's third husband, Charles McCarr, who had died under strange circumstances back in 1995. Jet had uncovered that Charles's death, initially ruled as an accident, had always bothered him. He found old newspaper clippings and records that hinted at foul play, including an insurance policy that Nancy had cashed out shortly after Charles's death. A confrontation. The notebook entries indicated that Jet had confronted Nancy about his suspicions and had even threatened to expose their secret sexual relationship with him if she didn't end their secret relationship and let him move on with his life. The discovery of the notebook was a game-changer for the police, who now had a motive for why Nancy might have wanted Jet silenced. She couldn't risk him revealing her involvement in Charles's death, which had been quietly buried for years. A pattern of deceit. Detective Travis immediately recognized the importance of this evidence and ordered a thorough review of Charles McCarr's death, suspecting that Nancy might have had a pattern of eliminating those who posed a threat to her. The notebook also explained Nancy's increasingly erratic behavior in the days leading up to Jet's murder, painting a picture of a woman who was desperate to protect her secrets at any cost. With this new evidence in hand, the police were more convinced than ever that Nancy Robertson McCarr was not only involved in Jet's death, but that it was a cold, calculated act to keep him from exposing her past. As the investigation moved forward, the police prepared to confront Nancy with this damning new evidence, bringing them one step closer to solving the mystery of Jet's tragic death. Hey, true crime case solvers interested in more real-life murder mysteries? Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Do you have any thoughts about this case or have a case of your own you'd like us to investigate? Leave us a comment. Stay safe, true crime case solvers. On the morning of November 3, 2020, the day of the contentious presidential election, Missouri was buzzing with election talk. But the local police were focused on a different task. With the new evidence from Jet Robertson's notebook in hand, Detective Mark Travis and his team felt confident they had found the murderer. They were ready to confront Nancy with the truth and bring closure to the Robertson family. A motive for murder. The notebook entries, which revealed Jet's suspicions about Nancy Robertson McCarr's involvement in the suspicious death of her third husband, Charles McCarr, in 1995, provided a strong motive for Nancy to silence Jet permanently. The police carefully reviewed the evidence, piecing together the sequence of events. They believed that Nancy, consumed by her obsessive love for Jet and terrified of her dark past being exposed, had lured Jet into the garage on the night of his murder. There, in a fit of desperation and fear, she grabbed a heavy wrench from his toolbox, the very tool Jet used daily for his shop class, and bludgeoned him to death. The brutal act ensured that Jet could never reveal her twin secrets. The arrest. With this theory in mind, Detective Travis obtained an arrest warrant for Nancy Robertson McCarr. While most of the town was preparing for a tense election day, the police made their move. They arrived at Nancy's quaint, well-kept home in Bridgeton, where she had been living alone since Charles's death. The officers knocked on the door, and Nancy, appearing calm and composed, answered. As the police read her the charges, her demeanor quickly changed. Shock and panic washed over her face as she realized the evidence against her was overwhelming. She protested her innocence, insisting that she loved Jet and could never harm him, but the detectives remained firm, knowing they had enough to bring her to justice. Nancy was handcuffed and led out of her home, a scene witnessed by a few neighbors who had gathered on the street, curious about the police presence. The aftermath. The news of her arrest spread quickly through Bridgeton, shocking the tight-knit community. Many found it hard to believe that the sweet elderly woman they had known for years could be capable of such a horrific crime. As Nancy was taken into custody, Jet's family, who had been grappling with the loss of their loved one, finally felt a sense of relief. Although the arrest didn't bring Jet back, it gave them hope that justice would be served. The police had successfully unraveled the twisted relationship and dark secrets that led to Jet Robertson's tragic death, and now the focus shifted to bringing Nancy to trial for her crimes. The trial. Nancy Robertson McCarr's trial began in December 2020, just weeks after the heated presidential election. The case had captured the attention of Bridgeton, Missouri, with local newspapers like the Bridgeton Gazette covering every detail. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michelle Harmon, 42, a determined and sharp-minded lawyer known for her tenacity, presented a strong case against Nancy. The trial was about to reveal the dark secrets that Nancy had kept hidden for so long, and the people of Bridgeton were eager to see justice served. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michelle Harmon, highlighted the evidence found in Jet's notebook, which revealed Nancy's involvement in the suspicious death of her third husband, Charles McCarr. This, they argued, was the motive for her killing Jet. He had threatened to expose her dark secret. During the trial, the prosecution laid out the events leading to Jet's death. They described how Nancy, consumed by fear and obsession, lured Jet to the garage and bludgeoned him to death with a wrench from his own toolbox. The wrench was not only a tool Jet used daily for his shop class, but also a symbol of Nancy's desperate attempt to silence him forever. The prosecution's argument was clear. Nancy had committed a premeditated murder to protect her secret. The defense, led by Robert Timmons, 54, a seasoned attorney with a reputation for defending tough cases, painted a different picture. They argued that Nancy was a frail, elderly woman who couldn't possibly commit such a violent act. They suggested that the real killer was still out there, and that Nancy was being unfairly targeted because of her close relationship with Jet. Timmons tried to cast doubt on the notebook entries, suggesting they were merely the thoughts of a troubled teenager. The trial was emotionally charged, with Jet's family members, including his mother Bree, attending every session. They listened in tears as the details of Jet's final moments were recounted, and their grief was palpable in the courtroom. The jury, however, was not swayed by the defense's arguments. After several days of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty. Nancy Robertson McCarr was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath. The sentence was met with mixed emotions. Relief from Jet's family, who felt justice had been served, and shock from some community members who had once respected Nancy as a beloved teacher and neighbor. The trial's outcome was a stark reminder of the dark secrets that can lurk beneath the surface, even in the most seemingly innocent of lives. A town in shock. After Nancy McCarr's conviction, life in Bridgeton, Missouri slowly began to return to normal, though the memory of the grisly murder lingered. The town, already stressed by the ongoing pandemic and the contentious 2020 election, was shaken by the revelations during the trial. Many residents who had once respected Nancy as a beloved teacher struggled to reconcile the image of the sweet elderly woman with the cold-blooded killer she had become. Jet Robertson's family tried to move forward, but the loss of their son and the horrifying circumstances of his death would stay with them forever. Jet's death left deep scars. His mother, Belinda Cana, found herself struggling with guilt and grief. She had only recently re-entered Jet's life, hoping to rebuild their strained relationship. Instead, she was left to mourn a future that would never come to be. Belinda returned to Springfield, where she continued her work as a nurse. However, the emotional toll of the tragedy weighed heavily on her. She sought solace in therapy, attending support groups where she could share her pain with others who had experienced similar losses. The grief was overwhelming, but Belinda knew she had to find a way to heal and move forward. Kevin Robertson, Jet's stepfather, also had to come to terms with the truth about his mother. He had long suspected something was off about Nancy's relationship with Jet, but he never imagined it would lead to murder. After the trial, Kevin stepped away from his work as a construction foreman to focus on his family. He spent more time with his children, hoping to heal the wounds left by the tragedy. Kevin also decided to leave Bridgeton, seeking a fresh start in a new town where the past wouldn't haunt him. A cautionary tale. For the residents of Bridgeton, the murder of Jet Robertson became a cautionary tale. A story that parents shared with their children as a warning about the dangers that can lurk even in a small town. The case would be remembered as a dark chapter in the town's history, a stark reminder that even the most trusted individuals can harbor deadly secrets. A legacy of tragedy. The memory of Jet Robertson's tragic death would linger, a painful reminder of the devastating consequences of Nancy's actions. The town of Bridgeton would never be the same, and the people who lived there would always remember the day that innocence was lost. The story of Jet's murder would serve as a warning, a reminder to always be vigilant and to never take anything at face value.